everyone and welcome to my channel. This is the Dressmakers Closet. My name's Jane. So today's video is going to be a sew with me sewing tutorial on how to make the Martha top. So before we go over to the tutorial, I had a little bit of a technical hitch. I did all the filming to make the Martha top and I had my iPhone doing the sewing machine filming, I had my camera doing the overhead filming, and for some reason I lost all the overhead filming from my camera, couldn't find it anywhere. So I had to remake another Martha top. I've got the iPhone footage for the sewing machine section, but then I had to remake another Martha top, this one, for the overhead camera. But it's the exact same blouse Martha top, it's just that I've got two fabrics going on. I've got this fabric for the overhead camera and this fabric for the sewing machine, but it's still the same Martha top, and obviously I've got two Marthas made. So without further ado, let's head over to the tutorial. Okay, so you should have all your pattern pieces cut out and the size that you've chosen, obviously. So you should have a front piece that's cut on the fold, the two back pieces, you've got two of them, and you're going to have your neck binding, your ruffle hem, two pieces there, and also your two sleeve pieces as well. I've made an extra length of bias for my neckline, and then I've got some left over to make a pretty bias trim if I need it later on. So we're going to go over to our machine and join our neck binding pieces together, just like you can see me there. And I always like to make a long piece, longer than I need, and stitch the strips together, like I say, because then you've also got some pretty binding to keep in stock in case you wanted to trim something with the contrasting fabric. And I hate wasting scraps, so that's what I always do. If I've got enough to cut on a bias, that's what I always do. So you can see me there just stitching my lengths of bias, but obviously if you're just using the two pieces for the pattern, you're only going to stitch the two pieces together. And then once you've done that, you just need to trim the joins and give it a quick little press. So first things first, we're going to take our two back pieces and we're going to overlock the centre back edges on both sides without trimming on your overlocker. If you haven't got an overlocker, you can use your zigzag stitch setting on your sewing machine or pinking shears or whatever is your preferred method of neatening. So we're just going to overlock from the top to the bottom on both back edges. And as you can see, I'm not trimming anything off, I'm just placing my overlocker foot against the edge of the fabric. I'm not trimming anything off, I don't want to be going into the seam allowance section. So now we've got both edges overlocked, we have our notches at the top there, the back opening notches. So if you just line up your two notches and pop a pin in, I like to put two pins in, then I know where I'm starting from. I'm just going to pin all the way down the remaining part to the hem edge, and once we've got it pinned, we're going to take it to the sewing machine and we're going to sew the seam. But on this particular seam, we're going to be sewing at 1.5 centimeter seam allowance only for this seam. The rest of the seam allowance throughout this tutorial is a 1 centimeter seam allowance. So starting from where I've got my two pins there, the notches, going to stitch all the way down 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. And once we've done that, we're just going to press our seam open all the way along the back, including the opened part at the top, and you've got two notches there at the top, so just line them up so the fold is on the notch there, and trim any threads you've got. And then just going to pop a pin in that open neck section, and we're going to do a little row of stitching down one side, pivot at the bottom, go across, pivot again, and go back up to the side. And as you can see me here on the machine, I'm just using my presser foot as a guide, and I'm just going to stitch down one side, and when I get to the bottom there, I'm going to pivot my needle, go across the bottom edge, and then pivot my needle again, and then stitch up the remaining side. And there is our nice and neatly stitched back opening section there. So once we've done that, we're going to now stair stitch the neckline. This is, I always do this, it just prevents your garments stretching out while you're handling it, especially if it's got quite a large neckline area. So you're just going to set your machine stitch to a smaller stitch and just run a row of stitching within the seam allowance around the front and the back neckline pieces. You can just see me there. I've got my presser foot within my 1 centimetre seam allowance, so this stitching is not going to show. It's just a protective stitching to stop the fabric stretching out while you're handling the garment during the sewing process. So once we've done our stair stitching, we're going to place our back pieces onto our front piece, right sides together, and we're just going to pin along the shoulders there and also down the side seams, and we're going to stitch together using our 1 centimetre seam allowance. And once we've done that, we're also going to neaten our edges as well. And I'm just going to give our side seams a nice press there, and also our shoulder seams. Always press as you go along, it does give for a better finish when you're making your garments. Once we finish pressing our seams, we're going to run 2 rows of gathering stitches between the 2 notches there on the centre front. You can see there, just in between the 2 notches, set your stitch length to the longest on your machine, and 2 rows of gathering stitches along there. So I'm just adjusting my stitch length to my longest stitch, which is 5 on my machine, and you can see there I'm just using my presser foot as a guide from the beginning of the notch there, stitching my first row using my presser foot against the edge of the fabric there on that neckline, and then my second row will be a couple of millimeters in from that row. And don't forget, once you've done your 2 rows of gathering stitch, to set your machine stitch back to the normal stitch length. And once we've finished our gathering stitches, we're just going to pull on the 2 of the threads on the top there and just gently pull. So your gathered section measures approximately 5 centimeters. So just get your measuring guide out and just adjust your gathers so it measures 5 centimeters. Make sure it's nice and neat and even, and then pop a pin in. I like to secure my end rather than tying a knot in. I just like to do a figure of 8 round a pin, then I don't have to undo any knots later on if I needed to. And then once you've got your 5 centimeters, then you're going to line up your neckline binding with the neck front notch there. There's a notch in between those gathers, centre front notch. So just line up the center of your binding with that right sides together, raw edges together, and just pin your neck binding all the way along to one end of the back, on the back side there of the opening on the back, and then again across the other side, pin your binding to the end on the other side. Once you've done all that and it's all pinned and your seam allowance is facing towards the back on the shoulders, and then we're going to go to the machine and stitch our binding 1 centimetre seam allowance from one side of the back right the way around the front to the other side of the back opening. So once you've got that stitched on, you may need to just trim that section there where you've got the gather if you want to reduce a little bit of the bulk. So just trim it away slightly like I have there, and then we're going to then press the seam allowance upwards. So just give a nice little press all the way along, and once we've pressed it, we're then going to fold over the remaining raw edge of the bias. So fold over by 1 centimetre, then over again onto the neckline, and your folded edge should sit neatly on the stitching line. You can just see there, fold it over onto the stitching line and pin in place. So you've got a really pretty neat bias neck edging, and just repeat that all the way around the neckline like you can see me doing there. Just pin it all the way around, take your time. And then once you've got to the end, we're then going to continue pressing and folding the remaining neck ties, just like we've done there. Press over 1 centimetre on each side of the remaining ties, just like you would do for bias. Trim the end off and then fold over a little bit on the end, and then tuck it in and then pin your tie down. Excuse my head. And just pin all the way along, and obviously just repeat for the other side. And then once we've done that, we're going to top stitch or stitch all the way along the tie, all the way across the neckline edge, and then down the remaining tie. once we finish sewing our ties, I just like to tie my ends into a little knot, pretty little knot. This is optional, you don't have to do that, but I think it hangs nicer at the back. So there you go, you've got your nice pretty neckline and your tie. So we're going to move on to our sleeves. So right sides together, we're going to pin the underarm seams there. So just pin them right sides together. We're going to stitch 1 centimetre seam allowance and overlock our edges. Once we've done that, we're going to overlock our hem edges of our sleeves, and then we're going to turn up a 2 centimetre seam allowance and stitch the hems in place. So just overlock both edges without trimming off any of the fabric, and then once we've done that, press under 2 centimetre on the hem edge, and then we're going to pin and stitch in place. Stitched our hems there, and now we're ready to insert our sleeves. So the sleeves have one notch to show it's the front of the sleeve and 2 notches to show it's the back of the sleeve, and so does the bodice. The bodice back has 2 notches and the bodice front armhole has 1 notch. So just line up with your right sides together, your underarm seam with your side seam, and make sure your 2 notches of your sleeve matches the two notches on the back, and the same for 1 notch on the front and the 1 notch on the front of the bodice armhole, so you don't put them in the wrong way. And then once you've got that correct, you then just pin your sleeve head notch to your shoulder seam, and then just pin all the way around your sleeve, just easing it in. You may need to just ease it in slightly with lots and lots of pins depending on what type of fabric you've got, but the sleeve does go in nice and smoothly. So just take your time and pin, and then take it to the machine and then stitch your sleeves in place. And once we've done that, we're going to then overlock or neaten our edges. So moving on to our remaining section now is the ruffle hem. So we're just going to join our short ends together, pin them and stitch them using our 1 centimetre seam allowance. Then we're going to neaten those edges there, and then we're going to then neaten both of the edge of the raw edges of the hem there. I just find it so much easier to neaten both edges, because when you're gathering your ruffle and you're handling it, it can tend to fray, especially if you're using quite delicate fabric that frays easily. So I just find it so much easier just to overlock both edges. So once you've done that, we're going to then press under our hem, 1 centimetre hem on one of those edges. Now obviously if you've got a directional print, make sure you're using the right way, you've got your hem the right way obviously, but mine is just floral fabric, so it doesn't really matter which edge I chose. Once we've finished the neatening, we're just going to press it there, and then press under 1 centimetre seam hem edge. So 1 centimetre all the way along, press and pin, and then we're just going to stitch that down. I always find it easier to do the hem before adding the ruffle to the blouse. It's just so much easier doing it this way. So we'll finish off the hem and we'll stitch that in place. To now set our machine, stitch back to the longest length on our machine, and we're going to do 2 rows of gathering stitch on the remaining raw edge of our ruffle hem there. So 2 rows of gathering stitch. I like to use my footer as a guide for the first row and then a few millimeters in from there for the second row. And here you can see me just popping in 2 pins just so I can see where the center of the ruffle is. So I've got the side seams obviously, which we're going to match up with the side seams on the blouse, and then I just wanted to make a note of the center points so I can then line up with the center front of the blouse and the center back of the blouse. So you just need to now pull on your 2 threads to gather that ruffle all the way around, and just pull it until it is the same width as the hem of your blouse. And then we're just going to pin the ruffle right sides together, raw edges together onto the blouse, pin, stitch in place and overlock, and then our Martha top will be complete. Once we've overlocked the hem there, we're just going to pull out any gathering stitches that are showing on the right side, just pull them out, and then we're just going to give it a nice final press our seam allowance of our ruffle hem upwards, and yeah, our Martha blouse is complete. And yeah, I'm really pleased with this version actually, so I'm glad I had to make 2 in the end. And just tie the pretty little necktie detail at the back, And how cute is this top with its feminine neckline, feminine high-low ruffle hem and pretty tie neck detail. So that's how to make the Martha top. I hope you enjoyed today's sew along with me tutorial, and I hope I wasn't too confused in having the two different fabrics going, but it's still the same Martha top. I've just ended up with two Martha tops for the price of one. In fact, I've got three Martha tops. That's the one I made last year. That's the one I made for the original tutorial, and this is the one I had to make for the lost footage. But yeah, it's such a pretty feminine top. I'll pop the link to the pattern in the box below if you haven't already got it and you'd like to purchase the pattern and download it, and then obviously you can follow along with this tutorial, and obviously the written instructions as well go alongside it. And it's in extra small all the way to 2XL. It's a lovely loose fitting flowy drapey top, and yeah, once you've made one you're going to make a few more, I can guarantee it. Obviously I've got two Marthas out of this sew along tutorial, so I'll pop some pictures up of me wearing it just so you can see how different they both look, all depending on the fabric that you choose. Obviously I've gone for floral because that's my vibe, but I think it would look quite nice in maybe a plain fabric, a nice gingham fabric. Any light to medium weight fabric would work really well. If you like this fabric, this cotton lawn, I do still have it available in my shop. I've probably got approximately 8 meters or so, 10 meters maximum left of it. It really is pretty, so delicate, really pretty cotton lawn. So if you fancy getting yourself some and making maybe a Martha, then I'll pop the link for this fabric as well in the box below, as well as the link for the sewing pattern if you haven't already got it. If you like my creative content and you'd like to see more from me, why not join me over on my Patreon, subscribe to my Patreon account, and then there will be more exclusive creative content over there if that's something that you might fancy. But if you like this video, don't forget to give me that lovely thumbs up, and if you haven't already, subscribe if you'd like to follow along with me. And yeah, so that's it for today's video. I shall see you on my next sewing video. Bye for now.